think we don't have one. It was going to be Bill English.
I could I watched it last night. Let me tell you, what can I tell you about it?
I don't know.
This is a metaphor for Bill English, isn't it?
Oh, harsh.
No, I don't think it is. It's just an absence of a soundtrack.
It's just an absence of someone on the other end of some soundtrack.
We might bring that to you tomorrow. I think this is half interesting to you. Was it this mentioning the idea of journalism before we go tonight?
I was. Oh, goodness. Okay. Let's try and engage my brain. Context. So you had a viewer that was upset.
Hang on. I can go back to the interview with Bill English.
Phew. But can I talk about journalism next time?
Jacinda Ardern has been asked if she'll have time to have kids with such a big role, and she doesn't have any. Yet you've got 6. How come you've never been asked?
Well, I do. Well, I get asked quite a bit about my role as a father. But you're right, no one really suggests that because I've got children I can't do my job.
Well, if you put yourself in, like, the media's shoes or something, why do you think that they haven't asked you very much?
Why do I think? I just... because they don't... I presume it's because the media don't believe that me having children makes it harder for me to do my job.
Do you believe it's slightly sexist, given she's female and you're male?
Well, you'll make up your own mind about that.
Well, he did fall back on political. Yeah.
What a missed... I was watching the program last night and I thought it was really, really entertaining. That bit drove me mad. What a perfect opportunity for him to say, without being political about it, was just to say it's her and her partner's business. It's nobody else's business.
That wee student, that is a phenomenally intelligent wee student.
She was cool. She's going to lead the press gallery one day. She's cool.
Should we get children to run the debates?
Yes. It'd be a lot better. It was a really fun, entertaining program. The second part's on tonight.
One more quick one, because maybe the toughest questions were reserved for Winston Peters.
You've talked about the Asian invasion. Why do you single out Asians?
I don't. If you go on my Facebook, you'll see thousands of Asian names that support our policies. I've never talked about the Asian invasion. My opponents have tried to refer to me and my comments as being about that, but I never have.
I've heard you want to reduce the migrants down to 10,000. What do you have against migrants?
Nothing. At all.
Then why would you want to reduce the migrants down to 10,000?
Good follow-up question there by that young man.
Good follow-up
Didn't
question.
Winston say 2 Wongs don't make a right?
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I'm 99% sure he did, and he thought that he was hilarious. So I'm not sure that Winston was fully honest in his answers, unsurprisingly.
I think there was the famous statement that about wandering down Queen Street in Auckland and wondering if you're still in New Zealand or some other country.
Yeah,
I think there's a
clip
litany of statements that perhaps gel with what the questioner was asking.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. About your first example, I can't recall that.
I couldn't either. Don't know.
Anyway, that was a nice little ending to the program. And they do respond differently when... I mean, you would with children because you'd be nice to children, but there's something about the replies that's different too, isn't there?
There is. They're more honest, and not more honest necessarily, but easier to understand.
And more thoughtful.
I learnt stuff listening to it, watching it.
Alan Reid, lovely to have you on the panel. We'll talk about journalism next time.
Thank you.
All right, I'll save it up for you. And David Cormack, thank you for your presence too today.
Thank you.
That's us, everybody, and we are back tomorrow with the panel, and we're standing by now for John Campbell and Checkpoint.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, Bill English heads to rural New Zealand. Jacinda Ardern heads to Wellington, and 100,000 people head to the polls in a single day. Jane Patterson is on the campaign trail. Jacinda Ardern is live here in the studio. The gas pipe rupture at Auckland Airport, more flights cancelled. The airport CEO, Adrian Littlewood, is also live here with us in the studio. Also tonight, claims DHBs have been critically underfunded for years. An outcry over Checkpoint's revelations last night that prostate cancer patients in Dunedin have had their cancer spread while waiting for surgery. Plus, Dunedin parents angry a crucial school bus service has just been cut without warning. And Joseph Parker's promoter thrown out of a press conference just days out from the big fight.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. A fleet of tankers has been brought in to move jet fuel from Marsden Point to Auckland as the fuel crisis grows. A critical pipeline from the refinery has been shut down for repairs, forcing airlines to cancel scores of flights and grounding thousands of passengers. Laura Tupou reports.
An Air New Zealand Boeing 777 has been sent to Wellington this afternoon to fill its tanks with fuel as alternative supplies for refuelling in the Pacific decline. The aircraft will return to Auckland to service long-haul flights while airlines try to reduce their usage to 30%. Refining NZ says it's waiting for sign-off on its plan to truck jet fuel from the Marsden refinery to Auckland. Meanwhile, 13 Z Energy petrol stations have run out of 95-octane petrol. Ko Laura Tupou aho.
Auckland's mayor wants a safety and security review of the twin fuel and gas pipelines running through the city. Phil Goff says the leak in the Northland section of the fuel pipeline feeding Auckland highlights possible complacencies of both that line and a pressurised gas pipeline that runs alongside it. Mr Goff says the natural gas pipeline can explode spontaneously if ruptured.
Once upon a time, with the fuel line going under the driveway in my house in Mount Roskill, there was a daily highway patrol. That's been dropped over time, and I think we now need to look again at the resilience and the protection for that pipeline from third-party interference.
Phil Goff. Nationals leader Bill English says he's told his candidates to put off any unnecessary travel in light of the fuel shortage. Civil servants have also been asked to cancel all non-essential air travel in and out of Auckland in a directive issued by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. The Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment, which is acting as the lead agency for the notice, says it's prudent the public sector is doing what it can to help airlines and fuel suppliers meet the challenges of the situation. Mr English says most of National's candidates will be sticking to campaigns in their electorates.
And I've advised them not to do any unnecessary travel, but they should be in their electorates campaigning. On Thursday and Friday, I'll be on a bus from Wellington to Auckland, so that may help by freeing up some seats on airplanes.
Bill English. Auckland petrol stations are telling motorists not to panic about a fuel shortage. Z Energy says it will be able to meet the demand, and BP says all grades of petrol are available at stations in Auckland. A manager working at a BP outlet in the central city says it's had up to 30% more customers coming in to fill up in the past 2 days. He says some of them are very worried about the fuel shortage, but there's no need to be.
We have enough stock, so I think so that people should not worry for their petrol. Don't panic, it should be very fine soon. You're going to receive petrol at the same rate, there's no problem.
The manager of a central Auckland BP station. And just a hand, Air New Zealand has announced it's taken the unusual step of restricting ticket sales, including for international trips. Hurricane Maria, now a potentially catastrophic Category 5 storm, has torn into the Caribbean island of Dominica with sustained winds of 260 kilometres an hour. Its Prime Minister, Roosevelt Skerritt, has posted on Facebook that his roof has been torn off, his house is flooded, and he's at the complete mercy of the hurricane. He later added he has been rescued. Maria is moving roughly along the same track as Irma, the hurricane that devastated the region this month. The nearby island of Martinique has declared a maximum level alert. Dominican Republic John Tutengal says it's dangerous to be outdoors.
It is actually unsafe to step out of the door. There are things flying about in the air, so debris is kind of in the air, small pieces of paper and I guess small rocks.
Next in Maria's path is the French territory of Guadeloupe, home to about 400,000 people, then Puerto Rico and Hispaniola. More than 100,000 people voted yesterday, the highest number since early voting began a week ago. It brings the total number to have cast their ballots to 551,000, closing in on the 2014 total of 717,000 early votes. There's still 4 days of early voting open. It's 5:04. To sport, and boxer Joseph Parker has no idea what his manager David Higgins was trying to achieve with his tirade of abuse against his opponent Hughie Fury. Higgins stormed out of a pre-fight media conference ahead of Parker's WBO heavyweight title defence in Manchester on Sunday after confronting Fury's camp over the decision to have a British referee and judge involved in the fight. Parker says he doesn't know if Higgins was drunk, but Hughie Fury labelled the incident an embarrassment.
It's an embarrassment, isn't it? To see a man, it looks like he's just come off from a night out. He's white as a ghost. I called him Snow White. He was like slurring, he was rocking side to side. He was that pissed. And as my dad was speaking to him, it was like he was shitting bricks. He was going whiter and whiter.
Hughie Fury. The former All Black and Hurricanes loose forward Victor Vitor has been named Player of the Year in French rugby's top 14 competition. Vitor had a standout debut season, helping La Rochelle to the top qualifying spot, although they were beaten in the semi-finals by Toulon. Line judges face an uncertain future after the ATP announced they'll be replaced by electronic line calls at the upcoming tennis tournament in Milan. For the first time at an ATP event, the chair umpire will be the only official on court, with Hawkeye technology used to judge whether shots are in or out. That's the news.
Hello, I'm John Campbell.
And I'm Guy Espiner. Radio New Zealand has been delivering election results for decades, the first Kiwi broadcaster to do so.
And this year we're taking it to a whole new level.
We'll be available on 7 media platforms.
You can catch us on RNZ National, RNZ's website, rnz.co.nz, and through the Morning Report and Checkpoint Facebook pages and YouTube.
And yes, we are on the telly, on Freeview Channel 50 and Face TV on Sky Channel 83.
Our team of top political reporters will be broadcasting from right around the country.
And from the University of Auckland's television studio, I'll be joined by a heavyweight team of political exponents and expert observers to dissect the results and call the shots.
It's game on, so bring it in close. We're on the radio and the website.
On the Morning Report and Checkpoint Facebook pages and on YouTube.
For Election 17, join us at 5 to 7 this coming Saturday night here on RNZ National.
And on the telly.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland mainly fine, but isolated showers in Northland. Waikato to Kapiti, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Mainly fine, but scattered showers this afternoon into evening with possible thunderstorms and hail. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington. Showers today, some heavy from Gisborne to Wairarapa with possible thunderstorms and hail. Becoming mostly fine tomorrow, but the odd afternoon shower. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine, however isolated showers about Nelson today with possible thunderstorms and a few showers spreading to most places tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, showers clearing tonight, mainly fine tomorrow but cloudy spells in Canterbury. Otago and Southland, mainly fine but cloud and the odd shower about coastal Otago. And for the Chatham Islands, periods of rain easing to the odd shower tomorrow. It's just gone 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. Coming up tonight, the campaign trail. Jane Patterson is filing for us. Jacinda Ardern is joining us live in the studio. Much more on the program tonight. Let's begin with Auckland's fuel crisis, which has widened, spreading from the airport to the city's petrol pumps. More than a dozen Z Energy stations have run out of 95-octane petrol. The issue here, of course, the rupture of the only pipeline carrying jet fuel from Marsden Point in Northland, just south of Whangarei, to the airport. It was discovered last Thursday. Thousands of airline passengers have been grounded after airlines cancelled dozens of flights again today, after they were allocated 30% of their usual fuel. Now, Auckland Airport CEO is going to join us live in the studio next, but first, Laura Tupou with the latest.
Air New Zealand was sending an empty Boeing 777 to Wellington this afternoon to fill up with fuel as supplies decline in the Pacific, where some international flights are being forced to stop over to fuel. Refining NZ says it's made a jet fuel truck loader that needs to be signed off before trucks can start carrying the fuel to Auckland. The head of the board of the Airline Representatives Association, Justin Ardern, says more flights will be cancelled in coming days as airlines try to cope with a 30% fuel allocation.
They'll be doing a checkpoint at the end of tomorrow to determine whether the airlines have managed to hit that or not, and then whether any further adjustment would be needed.
The fuel shortage is now hitting motorists, with Z Energy running out of 95 octane petrol at 13 petrol stations in the Auckland region. Z says it's focusing on supplying diesel and 91 octane because more than 90% of cars use that. Fuel companies say diesel and petrol supplies are being replenished by trucks from Marsden Point and Mount Maunganui. They're urging motorists not to panic, but this BP manager says some are worried.
We have enough stock, so I think so that people should not worry for their petrol. Don't panic, it should be very fine soon. You're going to receive petrol at the same rate. There's no problem.
But Aucklanders say it's been a hassle to sort out travel plans amid the flight disruptions. Catherine Hobson has a flight to Wellington this week, but is filling her car up just in case.
It's a bit unsettling knowing what we should be doing, but I'm just filling up with petrol in case we need to drive.
Fuel restrictions are also affecting importers. Daniel Silva from the Importers Institute says flights from Asia and Europe are worst hit.
Especially at this time of the year where a lot of importers are stocking up for the Christmas season, it can be quite disruptive.
Auckland's mayor wants a review of the safety of gas and fuel pipelines which run side by side through the city. Phil Goff says he understands the LPG gas pipeline is checked less frequently than in the past.
People have forgotten that there were pipelines under there. Yes, there is warning tape over the top, but maybe the system has become too complacent about that sort of interference, and given that there can be dramatically bad results from a rupture of those pipelines, I think we need to take it more seriously.
National leader Bill English says he's told his candidates to put off any unnecessary travel, and civil servants have also been asked to cancel all non-essential air travel in and out of Auckland. In Auckland for Checkpoint, ko Laura Tupouaho.
Now, in the past few minutes, we've heard Air New Zealand is now restricting ticket sales and stopping all sales on some international services. We're just trying to get some clarity around that from the airline itself. It says it will have to cancel 9 international flights to Australia, Fiji and Vietnam tomorrow, bringing total international cancellations this week to 39. The airline's warning of further disruptions in coming days. It says it's also trying to cut back on cargo loads. Adrian Littlewood is the CEO of Auckland Airport. He joins us in the studio now. Nice to have you with us, Adrian, and thank you for coming in.
No problem.
How's it going?
Well, look, it's been a busy couple of days. I think there's been a very significant response, as you'd expect, and as the public would expect from all the different organisations and companies involved. But look, it's been a bit of a challenge, and particularly for passengers. Obviously, you heard in that piece before about how it's affecting people's lives, and I think we all understand when travel goes awry, it has quite significant consequences for a lot of people.
And it's going to get worse before it gets better?
Well, look, I think, to date, actually, the airlines have done a fantastic job in terms of managing through. While there's been a number of flights affected, about 5% only of our flights today.
What number
we think
today?
That might grow. Look, about 29 flights today affected.
And you think that might grow over the next few days?
Look, there's a reasonable chance it will, and I think, you heard that recent information from Air New Zealand about how they're managing that flow of, fuel. Look, the airlines have done a great job in terms of consolidating, smaller aircraft, A320s, onto larger aircraft across the Tasman. They're bringing fuel across. They're doing gas and go stops in other airports on the way to long-haul destinations. But, we're all an interconnected part of an international system. So when the draw on fuel happens at other airports, that affects their supply. So it's being constantly monitored.
How did this happen?
Well, look, it's important to understand the different component parts of this system, right? So there's different parts owned and managed by Refining New Zealand, by the oil companies, and they essentially own and manage the entire system.
So you have no role in this other than the oil companies at the airport are your tenants, right?
That's right. They house the tanks on our land, just adjacent to the domestic terminal, which holds quite a load of fuel there. And then there's a lot more fuel at Wiri Oil, which is just up the road in Wiri. And that combined actually can accommodate about 12 days of normal usage for jet fuel at Auckland. So it's quite a significant store of fuel there. But obviously the issues happen upstream at the pipeline that feeds actually multiple fuel products into Auckland.
What have New Zealand Mining told you about what the digger was doing? Have you heard, for example, that it was looking for swamp coating? Has anyone told you that?
Look, I think there's been some views on what might have been caused. I think it's better to speak to New Zealand Refining about that issue. They've kept us updated about the issue as it has unfolded. Obviously, we heard early on Thursday there was an issue that was escalated during the weekend, and since that time we've pulled together, as have all the companies, our teams, to try and work on this problem. So it's been a rolling effort.
Okay, so it's not your problem other than you and your tenants and the airlines who use your airport are the victims of it. Now, that's absolutely understood. Have you been let down? Should a pipe that supplies jet fuel to the country's biggest airport and the gateway to how many tourists a year come into this country?
19 million people visiting through our airport. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a significant number of people. Be able to be undermined by a digger just south of Whangarei?
Well, look, I think these are all complex and interconnected bits of infrastructure. I think the reason there is storage adjacent and near the airport was to allow for potential events to occur. I don't think anyone would be other than disappointed, for passengers in particular, and all those affected by it, all the companies affected by it, by what's happened. I think the key question is how quickly can we get it up and restored, and what options can we put in place to provide resilience.
What are you hearing about getting it up and restored?
Well, I think the best advice has come from Refining New Zealand. They've been quite clear, sometime between Sunday midday and Tuesday midday. Then there's a period of time around recharging and priming the lines.
Because there'll be rubbish fuel in there, right? A bit of dirt and crap.
And obviously product quality is incredibly important. They are the experts in that question, and that question needs to go to the oil companies first. So
the pipe will be back in action by the beginning of next week, but when will you expect it will return to normal service?
Well, that's a good question. I think it really depends on how many people are disrupted in the next few days. As I said earlier, the airlines have done a great job in terms of helping those customers in the last few days. As more potential cancellations occur, there may be people looking to restart those flights, and so I think there may be, as the pipeline comes on and the fuel flows back, maybe more people looking to fly. So I think there'll be a period where we're going to have to work through how those impacts flow out. And obviously we've got school holidays not far away, so very keen to get that cleared away.
Are you expecting any day to be particularly bad?
Still too hard to say. I think, I think as we look towards next Friday, or Friday week, start of the school holidays, I think that'll be a time we're particularly all focused on.
That land that you own at Wiri, where there are the big tanks, does fuel, petrol, anything go from there to other places? For example, are you shipping it out to other regions? Is this beginning to be a kind of domino thing that's going to impact Pacific neighbours, anyone that you might be using the pipes to get fuel to Wiri and then on from Wiri to elsewhere?
Look, I'm probably not the best person to comment on that. The Wiri site is actually owned by the oil companies and operated and managed by them. They can talk to that. I can talk to the fact that I know that other airports around the region are being affected by that, but fuel-specific questions around land fuel should be really addressed to them.
What airports around the region?
Well, if you think of places like Nandi and Brisbane, those places are now going gas and go stops for the long-haul airlines who are stopping there to pick up additional fuel. Obviously, they already have their own airlines to support there. So I know all the airlines and fuel companies are looking at those different options and trying to find different methods. I know, for example, Air New Zealand is taking a 777 to Wellington to fuel up before they leave from Auckland. So all of those options are being accounted for, including additional fueling at Christchurch.
So you talked about gas and go. That is that planes that are doing long-haul stops somewhere close on the way to gas up. So you talked about Nandi and Brisbane. Is this putting pressure on fuel stocks in those airports?
Look, I think it's being monitored. I think pressure is yet to be determined. I think naturally we'll keep an eye on that collectively as an industry to make sure that they are thinking that through. But I think you can pick up from the airlines they are looking at all options at the moment.
God, it's all on for young and old, isn't it?
Sure is.
Adrian Littlewood, CEO of Auckland Airport, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Any feedback on that is very welcome. You can text 2101 or you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, of course. Coming up on the program, opposition parties say a Dunedin man whose cancer has spread whilst waiting for prostate cancer surgery is the sad consequence of long-term critical underfunding of our DHBs. We're going to look at this. Of course, we broke this on Checkpoint last night. Plus, dramatic scenes at a media conference ahead of Joseph Parker's heavyweight title fight against Hughie Fury. As Parker's promoter David Higgins is just biffed out of the conference. All of that and much more coming up. And when I say much more, Jacinda Ardern is going to join us and sit in the seat just vacated by Adrian Littlewood after 6 o'clock for an interview about all sorts of things. What does she think the most important thing she can do if she becomes Prime Minister is. Some public servants and MPs may have been grounded to save aviation fuel today, but the election campaign continues its seemingly endless takeoff. More than 100,000 people cast their vote yesterday, the highest daily total so far. The National and Labour leaders were playing true to form, with Bill English campaigning in the true blue Kaikoura electorate, while Jacinda Ardern was in the capital, trying to refocus the political debate onto health, with the latest on a pretty busy day for both of them. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
There's no Planet B. A clear message from children at Springlands Primary in Blenheim for National's Bill English when he visited their school this afternoon. But Mr English started the day at the BV Deli and Cafe. It wasn't long before Labour's candidate for Kaikoura, Jeanette Walker, realised there were visitors in town and decided to try to gatecrash the National Party leader's appearance.
Lisa here and everybody's here, so I thought Bill must be here, so I'll come over and have a cup of coffee.
Nice. You're going to go and say hi?
What would I say to him? Good to see you here. It's going to be a close competition.
She went for it, but Bill English wasn't interested.
Hello, how are you?
David here today.
Good to meet you.
Yeah.
I hope you're flat out getting votes.
I am.
Good on you.
It's going really well.
I'm only going to talk to staff up here.
As well as the staff, there was another person in the cafe Bill English did want to speak to, the former All Black and National MP Graham Thorne. Mr Thorne reminisced with reporters about playing rugby with Mr English as part of the parliamentary rugby team.
Yes, we won the World Cup in '95. I actually played with my son, which was one of the great thrills of my life. I was 49, he was 24. I was mad, but it was a great thrill. And Bill played on the wing. He lasted, I think, 10 minutes and broke his collarbone. Poor guy.
So he's been more successful as a politician than a rugby player?
Yes, he has been.
Mr English was keen to shift topics to his party's catch cry about the risk to the economy if National loses.
And a vote for Labour is simply going to stall things and then take them backwards. A vote for a minor party will also hinder our ability to get on with the ambitious plan for New Zealand. My view is voters can cut out the middleman, make their choice between National and Labour.
She is my friend. She is a person who I believe will be one of the great leaders of New Zealand. Give it up for Jacinda Ardern.
Labour's Jacinda Ardern spent the day in Wellington visiting yet another university where she addressed hundreds of students and staff. She also went to a health centre in Newtown where she was keen to get away from the debate about Labour's water tax and focus instead on health services.
We've had a more than 30% increase in the cost of going to the doctor under National. We want to bring that cost down for everyone. That means that New Zealanders will pay $10 less to go to the doctor, but those who are higher needs on lower incomes will pay $8 or less. That's what we've prioritised.
Ms Ardern says mental health would be at the top of a Labour government's to-do list.
When it comes to mental health in particular, we want to kick off that review work straight away and begin recruiting the staff that will work in our schools to try and bring down those terrible suicide statistics.
Meanwhile, the numbers of advance votes continue to rocket. More than 100,000 people voted yesterday, the highest number since early voting began a week ago. It brings the total to more than 550,000, closing in on the 2014 total of 717,000 early votes, with just 4 days to go. For Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
23 minutes past 5. We're going to stay with politics for a few more minutes. Opposition parties say a Dunedin man whose prostate cancer has spread after waiting 10 months for urgent surgery has been failed by an underfunded health system. Now, Labour, New Zealand First and the Green Party say Stephen Hoffman is the sad consequence of a DHB which has been critically underfunded. But as Bridget Burke reports, National leader Bill English says whilst unacceptable, the problem is indicative of long-standing issues at the Southern DHB.
Stephen Hoffman's GP referred him as an urgent case to Dunedin Hospital in September last year. He had classic symptoms of prostate cancer, a family history, an abnormal DRE, a rock-hard prostate and progressive urinary discomfort. But instead of having surgery within the Ministry of Health's 6-week guideline, the 62-year-old waited 10 months and the cancer spread to his rectum.
I've no idea.
Hoffman's situation. National leader Bill English said while his situation was unacceptable, it highlighted long-standing issues within Southern DHB's urology department.
I'm very sorry about that. Not quite sure what's going on. I think that is called gremlins in the system. That is the technical term for that. I was just wandering out, picking up scripts. So I'd left the studio. The story had left the studio. And here we are with the time at 24.5 minutes past 5. Moving on, we are going to return to that because, of course, that is a story that Checkpoint has worked on at considerable length for some weeks now. And in fact, we broke the details about what was going on and the cost of those long delays at the Southern DHB on our program last night. We will return to it once we've worked out what was happening with that story. But let's change the subject entirely and go to, what are we going to now, Pip Pip? The build-up to Joseph Parker's WBO heavyweight title defence against Britain's Hughie Fury, which descended into a farce. A bit like our efforts to get that story to where 6 days out from the fight in Manchester, Parker's promoter, David Higgins, was ejected from the media session after he confronted Hughie Fury's camp. Things heated up when Higgins got into a shouting match with Hughie's father and manager Peter Fury over the selection of the referee for the fights. Even by the standards of boxing, which is a bizarre sport at the best of times, this is pretty bizarre stuff. Sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
Hey, and anything you want to do about with your bodyguards, come here. Listen, who gives a about you anyway? Go on, Snow White. Hey!
Joseph Parker was left embarrassed by the outburst from promoter David Higgins, who was escorted from the room after starting a slanging match with the Fury camp over the appointment of a British judge and referee for the fight.
It made it very interesting. It had nothing to do with me. I'm here. He's my promoter, and I'm not really sure what that was about. But I'm focused on being here. I'm just focused on fighting. So.
Was he drunk?
I don't know. Just ask him. Where is he? Was he drunk?
Hughie Fury labelled Higgins' behaviour unprofessional.
It's an embarrassment, isn't it, to see a man. It looks like he's just come off from a night out. He's white as a ghost. I called him Snow White. He was like slurring. He was rocking side to side. He was that pissed. And as my dad was speaking to him, it was like he was shitting bricks. He was going whiter and whiter.
The appointment by the British Boxing Board of Control of British referee Terry O'Connor, the same official in charge of Hughie Fury's last 2 fights, has angered Parker's camp. However, Peter Fury's defended the referee's selection.
Has he insinuated that I've got the Boxing Board of Control, one of the most respected officiated group in the world boxing, to say I've got him in my pocket, the bent? I have got no interest in a referee, a judge or anything else. I'm here to see my son win a world title, and that's what we've been training for.
Parker's trainer Kevin Barry has played down the impact the refereeing appointment has had on his charge.
Dave thought, having a contract, that we would have neutral officials, and I know he's very frustrated. Myself and Joe, we have no concern. We don't worry about who the referee is, who the judge is. Please don't worry about David running off with the money, because we're going nowhere. We've come here for one reason, and that's for Joseph Parker to defend his world title.
Just whether Kevin Barry will feel the same way come Sunday morning will no doubt depend on whether Joseph Parker remains WBO heavyweight world champion or not. For Checkpoint, Stephen Hewson.
The time is 28 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. About 300 tractors have rolled into the small Hawke's Bay town of Clive to protest against access to water, which has united both rural and urban residents. It followed an application by several groups, including the Fish and Game Council and Whitewater New Zealand, to put water conservation orders on 2 of the region's largest rivers. The orders, which are part of the Resource Management Act, is designed to recognise and protect the outstanding values of particular bodies of water. However, those at today's rally fear such orders could have serious effects on Hawke's Bay's rural sector. Anne-Marie May filed this report.
Gerard Van Beek, who chairs the growers cooperative Twyford, says it is disappointing that groups like Fish and Game, which were part of a think tank seeking solutions to the area's water troubles, should seek a conservation order. He says at the moment the region only uses 2% of its allowable water allocation, and that includes watering crops.
Without the water, we cannot produce what we're so well known for as the high quality produce that we can get high value for, and we can pay our staff well, and we can make more investment so more tamariki, more young people can actually come and join us in our industry. We now have to say this is actually really shaky ground.
Giraffe Van Bake says the turnout of urban Hawke's Bay residents at today's protest shows it is not only the rural sector which will be affected if restrictions are put on water use.
They couldn't actually irrigate their sports parks. And you know, in Hawke's Bay, it gets really dry. 1 in 3, it gets really, really dry. Would mean we'll have no water. We couldn't play sports because it would be unsafe. These things just cannot happen, and that's why we're so angry. That's why the community is actually right here now and supporting us.
Waiora Taraha, a solo mother supporting a 5-year-old daughter, works at the Bostock Orchard and is also very concerned about what would happen if the water conservation orders were put in place.
The worst thing would be that they'd have to stop all production entirely, so that would be shut down all their businesses, because we all doubt that they would be able to grow and manage enough crop to export overseas to make enough money.
However, the head of Fish and Game New Zealand, Bryce Johnson, says the water conservation orders were first sought in 2009 and he believes locals are ignorant about what is involved, including that the orders won't affect existing resource consents for water.
That's explicitly stated in the statute, and I just don't think critics have actually bothered to read that. We would be more than happy to meet with these groups and talk them through the legislation, explain what our aspirations are for this and how it won't really affect their existing takes.
The Environmental Protection Authority says a hearing for the water conservation order applications may take place before the end of the year. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
It's coming up to 29 minutes to 6. We've just got a statement from Refining New Zealand. This is, of course, the latest on the pipe south of Whangarei. They've released a statement saying repair of the damaged pipe is progressing well. Refining New Zealand says its engineering team is on track to install the first inline plug of the pipe this evening and to meet the Wiri delivery window of midday Sunday the 24th and midday Tuesday the 26th, so somewhere in that 48-hour period. It says the weather forecast is good for the next 2 days, which is frankly miraculous in Auckland this time of year. We expect to make rapid progress with pipe repairs, Refining NZ is saying. It also says construction of a temporary jet fuel truck loading station at the refinery is now complete and ready to fill tankers as soon as they arrive. It says a root cause analysis study is underway to confirm what it believes to have been the cause of the rupture. Lots of speculation, but no confirmation about this. And to detail the process that led from damage to failure, this has been done with the support of 2 personnel from Calgary, Canada, who are now on site. We're also working very hard to confirm reports that there is real pressure on fuel at both Brisbane and Nandi airports now, because long-haul flights out of Auckland are doing little short stops to collect fuel from those airports as they progress to other more distant parts of the world. All of that, when we can confirm it, is coming up. Your Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. We've got Nona next with business news, and we've also got Jacinda Ardern joining us live in the studio after 6. Coming up on the program before that, Dunedin parents upset forced school bus routes have been axed without any consultation, forcing some children to spend up to an hour and a half travelling to school. But before anything else, Katrina Batten with the headlines.
Air New Zealand is now restricting ticket sales and stopping all sales on some international services because of the fuel crisis. It says it will have to cancel 9 international flights to Australia, Fiji and Vietnam tomorrow, bringing total cancellations this week to 39. It says up to 3,000 customers will be affected by tomorrow's cancellations and a further 6,000 inconvenienced by schedule changes. It warns of further disruptions in coming days. The airline says it's also trying to cut back on cargo loads. A fleet of tankers has been brought in to move jet fuel from Marsden Point to Auckland, while damage to a critical pipeline from the refinery is repaired. Meanwhile, Auckland petrol stations are telling motorists not to panic about a petrol or diesel shortage. Some Z Energy stations have run out of 95 octane, but the company says it will be able to meet the demand. BP says all grades of petrol are available at stations in Auckland. Nationals leader Bill English says he's told his candidates to put off any unnecessary travel in light of the fuel shortage. Civil servants have also been asked to cancel all non-essential air travel in and out of Auckland in a directive issued by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. Hurricane Maria, now a potentially catastrophic Category 5 storm, has torn into the Caribbean island of Dominica with sustained winds of 260 kilometres an hour. Maria is moving roughly along the same track as Irma, the hurricane that devastated the region this month. The nearby island of Martinique has been declared a maximum level alert. More than 100,000 people voted yesterday, the highest number since early voting began a week ago. It brings the total number to have cast their ballot to 551,000, closing in on the 2014 total of 717,000 early votes. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Battle. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier, who is sitting beside me in the Auckland studio. The latest quarterly Westpac Consumer Confidence Survey indicates people are more confident than they have been in a decade, which I would suspect is pretty unusual this close to an election.
It is really, and surprising, but that's what it shows. Overall, the survey just came down 1 point off of last quarter, or the quarter before, where it was at an all-time high. So the level is 112.4, 100 being the benchmark, so more positive, less positive, under. So very positive. What's interesting is that the way that people feel about their own self, their own household, has improved over the year earlier, and they are now at the highest level in more than a decade, since before the global financial crisis. And they're spending money not on major things for the home, and that kind of is what you'd expect with the slowdown in the housing market, but on going out and having a good time. In fact, they were asked if they had a windfall of, say, $10,000, what would they use the money for? Fewer of them said they'd use it to repay debt, which is interesting because household debt is at a record high level at the same time. Really, so they've got debt, but hey, the good times are rolling on. Wow. Yeah, it's interesting.
What did they say they'd spend it on, the 10 grand?
Well, all sorts of, going out, having a good time, I guess. That certainly, certainly they're not spending it on major household items, and they're not buying houses either. So go figure. Yeah,
quite an extraordinary survey.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So interesting.
Synlait milk.
You know, a lot of people don't know Synlait. It's not a household name, but they are hoping that one day they may be, because they're a wholesaler. They sell milk, specialty milk, to, say, A2 milk, which makes infant formula.
Yeah, that's taken off out of nowhere in the past few years.
That's right. And their milk is designed for people, say, for example, there's lactose intolerant people, but there's also people who are allergic to dairy. And their milk, A2 milk, manufactures this infant formula, which is based on Synlait's production, which has special characteristics, so that if you're allergic to milk, you might be able to have the Synlait product. Yeah. Now, Synlait doesn't brand, they are a wholesaler. However, they've decided that they're going to launch into consumer products sometime over the 12 months, but it's not going to be infant formula. What it's going to be is still a secret. Where it's going to be, also a secret. Watch this space, we'll find out.
What was the result, Nona? Did they have a result out today?
Yeah, they did. Their profit rose 11% to $38.2 million. Now, it would have been more, but they spent a lot of money on research development on those new products they're developing.
This is still a bit of a startup, really, isn't it?
It is, but you know what? Their revenue was up 39% to $759 million. That's one heck of a startup.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. What happened on the markets today?
Okay, so the NZ top 50 index, it rose 6 points to 7,765. Market's a little subdued there, just ahead of the Federal Reserve looking at Fed interest rates again. The New Zealand dollar trading at 72.8 US cents, 91.3 Australian, and 53.8 pence.
Nona Peltier beside me in the Auckland studio. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to return to our earlier story now, which we had the Gremlins meddling with. Cheeky little gremlins. This is opposition parties saying a Dunedin man whose prostate cancer has spread after waiting 10 months for urgent surgery has been failed by an underfunded health system. Now, this is a matter of interpretation, and it's also a matter of which side the political spectrum you are on. Labour, New Zealand First and the Green Party say Stephen Hoffman, who we spoke to on Checkpoint last night, is the sad consequence of a DHB which has been critically underfunded. You would have heard the Minister on Morning Report this morning. He disputes that. So too does National Leader Bill English. He says whilst it's unacceptable, the problem is indicative of long-standing issues at the Southern DHB. Let's go back to Bridget Burke's report.
Stephen Hoffman's GP referred him as an urgent case to Dunedin Hospital in September last year. He had classic symptoms of prostate cancer, a family history, an abnormal DRE, a rock-hard prostate and progressive urinary discomfort. But instead of having surgery within the Ministry of Health's 6-week guideline, the 62-year-old waited 10 months and the cancer spread to his rectum.
If I'd have seen them straight away when I should have been and had the operation within 2 months, that means that it wouldn't have been sitting there in me for another 8 months to turn into a radiograph tumour and basically shorten my life.
Today, when asked about Mr Hoffman's situation, National leader Bill English said while his situation was unacceptable, it highlighted long-standing issues within Southern DHB's urology department.
Of course, it's the obligation of the DHBs to make sure that where there's any evidence that it's less than a world-class service, they're taking action to change it. Sometimes, I mean, this is a big system. It's 7 or 8% of the whole economy. It's bigger than the dairy industry. And at any given time, there'll be some pressure points in it, and we expect the DHBs to deal with those effectively.
But Labour leader Jacinda Ardern says DHBs have been underfunded by $2.3 billion, and Mr Hoffman's story is a sad consequence.
Some of the stories that we've seen coming out of the Southern DHB in particular really are staggering. I think there'd be an expectation in New Zealand that you would, once you're diagnosed, get the health care you need. The fact that's not happening speaks to the drift we've had in healthcare and the need for action.
Southern DHB's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Nigel Miller, conceded to Checkpoint last night Mr Hoffman isn't alone.
Do you think there are more than 6 patients? Because that's the number we were looking at who had what seemed on the face of it to be really problematic delays. Do you think it is that number? More? What are we talking about?
I think it's very likely there's more.
More than 6?
That's why I feel so, disappointed that we find ourselves in a situation.
More than 6 men who have suffered such delays to their prostate cancer treatment that their life expectancy may be imperilled as a result of it.
There may well be. I can't give you a definite figure, but that's my fear.
New Zealand First leader Winston Peters says the government has made Mr Miller the fall guy for long-term underfunding.
The saddest thing there was the head of the DHB, who's obviously a decent, honest person, trying to explain away why somebody waited 10 months for something that should have taken maximum 6 weeks. And as a consequence, he's got a abridged, truncated life to look forward to. And frankly, we can all say what we want to say, but we're down dramatically in the health funding in this country. And the National Party's been getting away with a whole lot of flannel for a long time. And that's a story repeated over and over and over again around New Zealand.
Green Party leader James Shaw says the waiting times are unacceptable.
They are, at the very least, life-threatening. And, I know that a number of people have had their life expectancy cut severely because of the length of the waiting time.
Stephen Hoffman says he is now incontinent and has been told his prognosis isn't good. And while he's been given 5 years, he's yet to receive an apology from Southern DHB.
No, I haven't. I'm not that bloody worried about apologies. Basically what I'm doing here at the moment is I'm trying to get the cause to get them funding. The nurses and doctors in that hospital are bloody great. They've got nothing to work with. They need more funding, and it's just, that's what it's about. And I just don't want it to happen to anyone else.
What do you say to Stephen Hoffman and to the other men, and we've agreed now that there's more than 6 of them, who are in this position?
We are deeply regretful and sorry for the fact that they find themselves in the position, and it's our responsibility to do the best we can to correct it. And it's a very sad set of circumstances that a public health system should have this sort of failure in its provision of service.
A life-shortening failure?
It would appear so, yes.
Checkpoint has asked Southern DHB today when changes will be made to staffing and theatre resourcing within the urology department, and if they can clarify if nearly 1,000 urology patients are currently sitting outside the ministry's guidelines and waiting longer than they should for treatment. Late this afternoon, Southern DHB responded by saying it's dealing with this request under the Official Information Act. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
We are surprised that request is being dealt with under the Official Information Act. This does seem a strange turn of events for us, but it would, of course, push the response out beyond the election day. Parents and schools in Dunedin are angry and upset about school bus routes being axed without any consultation. Go Bus, which is co-owned by Ngāi Tahu and Tainui, will drop 4 routes around Otago Peninsula and to Sawyers Bay from the start of term next month. The move comes as the Otago Regional Council overhauls the bus system. It's bitterly disappointed, saying it may now step in. Here's our Otago Southern reporter Ian Telfer.
Nicola Magrutha lives on Otago Peninsula in Harrington Point, 25 kilometres from Dunedin. She says news that the school bus run would soon end was completely unexpected.
We found out yesterday the school sent out an email to parents letting them know that the school bus run was changing. And I was really shocked and disappointed, actually. It came out of the blue and there's been no consultation.
Ms Magrutha says her son's trip to high school took 45 minutes. He now faces a 1.5 hour trip each way, involving a change of buses and a long walk on busy roads.
Pretty horrified, actually. I think when they've already done a long school day and they've got homework to do, you know, he's doing senior exams, that adding 3 years of travelling into that is pretty disappointing.
The operator Go Bus told schools late last week it would drop the 4 school bus services at the end of the term, 3 along the Peninsula and Waverley areas, and 1 from Port Chalmers on the Inner Harbour. It says the routes are no longer financially viable. The chairperson of the Otago Peninsula Community Board, Paul Pope, says up to 100 children face a longer commute each day, plus the dangers of unsafe roads. He says Peninsula parents are angry.
Look, they're really grumpy about this. They are talking about Go Bus being a pretty nasty company that are not doing the best thing by the community.
Go Bus is part owned by Ngāi Tahu, whose own whānau of Otako Marae will be affected. They too appear caught out by the decision. The Otako representative Tahu Portuki says he's not surprised Go Bus is dropping the service because it lost its other council contracts this year. But he says the company needed to consult better.
I can understand why a number of families, including families that belong to Ngāi Tahu, are disappointed that are now going to be affected by the changes, and that better notice and better communication would have been advisable.
The local Dunedin South MP, Claire Curran, says she's had dozens of calls from upset parents and schools. And she says she's unhappy neither Go Bus nor the Otago Regional Council nor Ministry of Education is stepping in to fix it. The Regional Council seems to have been blindsided. In the same week it began the biggest overhaul of the bus routes and services since the late 1980s. Its Support Services Manager, Gerard Collings, says he's bitterly disappointed with Go Bus, but denies the Council's changes brought on the problem. Mr Collings says the Council's considering ways to fix it.
Look, we're in close discussion with the Ministry of Education on this matter, and like us, they're really shocked about the time and the effort. And those discussions will include potential subsidy from possibly the individual schools, Ministry of Education, or if Council have a change in policy direction, this Council.
The Ministry of Education says it's working with the Council and Go Bus to make sure there are suitable transport options for the students affected, but it wouldn't go into details. Despite the furore, Go Bus is standing firm. The company refused to be interviewed today, but in a statement late this afternoon said the services were fully commercial routes which it couldn't keep running due to declining patronage. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Ian Telfer, tēnei.
29 flights cancelled at Auckland Airport today, but Europe's largest airline, Ryanair, is saying to Auckland Airport, hold my beer, because they're preparing for up to $40 million in compensation claims over its extraordinary bungle with its pilots' holidays. The budget airline has announced it will cancel 50 flights a day for the next 6 weeks, affecting as many as 400,000 passengers. Why? Well, here's the ABC's Lisa Miller.
Thank you for flying Ryanair. Last year, over 90% of our flights arrived on time.
In an industry that's competitive and unpredictable, Ryanair has been one of the mainstays.
And we look forward to welcoming you on board again soon.
The Dublin-based budget airline has a motto of always getting better. But for Chief Executive Michael O'Leary, things couldn't get much worse.
This is clearly a mess-up. I take responsibility for the mess-up. It is my mess-up, and therefore I have to clean it up.
He's taken the drastic action of cancelling 2,000 flights, 50 flights a day for the next 6 weeks, because they're short-staffed. He blames a change to the rostering process, a busy summer season, and pilot contracts that give them holidays in 4-week blocks.
The blame for this lies with us.
The foul-up has stunned many in the industry, and while Michael O'Leary was downplaying the number of passengers who'd be affected, just 2%, he said, he admits it's not a good look.
Yeah, clearly there's a large reputational impact, for which again I apologise, and we will try to do better in future.
Financial analyst Jeremy Stretch from CIBC Markets says this crisis can't be simply blamed on thunderstorms and holidays.
It does appear that Ryanair are losing a number of their pilots to a rival operation, and that might suggest to some that perhaps there might be some contractual issues which are causing some of those pilots to jump ship.
Ryanair has now promised to at least give people a fortnight's notice if their flight is going to be cancelled, but the compensation claims are likely to be hefty, and the regulators as well have indicated they'll be taking a closer look.
That's the ABC's Lisa Miller reporting. Hurricane Maria has made landfall in Dominica in the Eastern Caribbean. The US National Hurricane Centre says Maria is a potentially catastrophic Category 5 storm. Yes, another one with sustained winds of over 260 kilometres an hour. Forecasters say she's coming in on almost exactly the same track as Hurricane Irma just 10 days ago, and that will take her directly across the already devastated British Virgin Islands, where residents are only just getting back on their feet. The BBC's Jeremy Cook is there.
It is a race against time. Battening down, shoring up, bracing for the storm to come. The fear, the forecast, is that Hurricane Maria is about to sweep through these already devastated islands. If Irma was the knockout punch, what's predicted next feels like a low blow.
I'm homeless.
For Francine, it's all too much.
Because all the shelters are full. And this is the devastation. You notice I have on different shoes. I can't find any clothes. You notice how I'm dressed. We really need help here because a lot of people are suffering.
Are you strong enough to take this again? Another hurricane?
Well, no, but what can we do? Hope and pray. Sorry, Dad. It's terrible. We don't know what to do. I believe that as time go by, we got to face it.
We wish you all the best. Good luck. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
The harsh reality here is that all the tons of debris can't be fixed down or made safe before the next hurricane is due to hit. The last thing these communities need. They've been doing their best to move these mountains of wreckage to the side of the roads to make some sort of sense of what is total chaos. But with winds now predicted to once again top 100 miles an hour, every piece of this wood and this plastic and these metal roofing sheets become potentially deadly airborne missiles. Adding to the problems here, the drains are clogged with debris. More flooding seems inevitable. Frightening times, aren't they, with this other hurricane coming in?
Yes, it is. Definitely. I am frightened. There's a lot of loose debris all over. The trees that act like a barricade to the strong winds, all the leaves are gone. Some of the trees have fallen, and the trees hold the hillsides. So if we have a lot of rain, we're going to have some erosion and potential mudslides. So that's a big concern.
Everyone here is doing all they can to prepare. More than 20,000 British citizens facing their second potentially devastating hurricane in as many weeks.
It's Jeremy Cook, the BBC's Jeremy Cook, in the British Virgin Islands. It's 7 minutes to 6. You are with Checkpoint. Let's head home again. Tempers flared at a meeting in Timaru today over a looming log burner ban. The Canterbury Regional Council is planning to ban burners more than 15 years old by the end of October in an effort to address the city's air pollution. Logan Church is in Timaru.
Home heating is an important issue in Timaru, where log burners remain a cheap and efficient way to survive a South Island winter without running up a huge power bill. But the burners also contribute to the city's air pollution, described by the World Health Organization last year as the worst in Oceania. The council's plan to ban old burners in an effort to change that title has left many hot under the collar. About 100 people turned out to a meeting today with the Environment Minister, Nick Smith. One local said residents were being unfairly targeted when major polluters such as the milk processing plant, schools and the pool were allowed to continue burning coal.
I'm telling you straight, you're talking bullshit. Blame it on Ken, you're supposed to be their boss, aren't you?
No, not quite.
Why?
Am I the boss of ECAN?
Well, I thought you were.
I am responsible for the national environment standards. ECAN is a little bit unusual because it ended up being
unusual. They're bloody right there. They're right there, mate.
And so we made some.
The council has recorded 17 high pollution nights this year already. It aims to have that number down to 3 a year, and to help achieve that, it is banning all burners 15 years or older by the end of October. Dr. Smith said he would continue discussions with residents about fears they would not be able to afford the cost of replacing the old fires with heat pumps or expensive low-emission burners, but said he would not override Environment Canterbury's decision.
I'm committing to consulting on that, but we would need to engage in a nationwide discussion around those national regulations, and we're committed to doing that prior to Christmas.
But that's not going to help anyone before the October deadline, is it? I suppose the point
the government is not going to interfere in the role of Environment Canterbury around their regulation of air quality short term.
One resident at today's meeting, Doug Cleveland, took me around to his house afterwards to see his log burner.
How old is your log burner?
17 years old. We put it in when we built in 2000.
And are you going to be replacing it on October the 31st?
No, I am not replacing it. My fire is no problem. My wood is dry and I have no problem with it burning.
A Canterbury Regional Councillor, Peter Scott, says the ban forms part of an air plan that was developed and consulted on several years ago.
This community in Timaru is feeling the pain of that, and they're a bit upset, and I can see why they're upset. I think they're seeing what reality is in terms of trying to clean up the air in Timaru.
Mr Scott says the council is not moving on its October 31st deadline. The consequences for continuing to use a log burner past that date remain unclear. In Timaru for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
4 minutes to 6, just a little note. If you were watching that, Logan, who is one of the brilliant young graduates out of Christchurch Broadcasting School, shot and edited that story, as well as being the reporter in it. Nice work, Logan Church. A British cyclist has smashed the Guinness World Record for the fastest circumnavigation of the planet on a bicycle. Endurance athlete Mark Beaumont cycled 16 hours a day, covered 29,000 k in 79 days. He finished back in Paris, where his journey began. The BBC's Lucy Williamson was at the finish line.
Every road has its challenges. Only one has the reward. Since he last saw Paris, Mark Beaumont has cycled 18,000 miles in less than 80 days. In that time, his youngest daughter has begun to walk and talk. His 4-year-old had reserved the first hug.
It's going to take a couple of weeks for me to decompress and come back to normality. I've not walked for 2.5 months. I remember at the airport last week flying across from North America, I walked up a flight of stairs and it hurt, really hurt. So I'm going to have to get off a bike and get back to normal life.
From Paris, Mark headed east through Russia, Mongolia and China, crossing Australia and New Zealand before flying to Alaska, where he cycled down through North America, before landing back in Europe for the final stretch from Lisbon to Paris. Cycling from 4 a.m. until 9 at night, he saw the sun rise and set over the Australian desert, the vast Russian landscape, the Pyrenees. Averaging 240 miles a day, the equivalent of cycling from London to Blackpool every day since the 2nd of July.
I thought I'd lost my front teeth.
Through injuries, high winds and heavy rains.
Officially 3/4 of the way around the world, but I'm fighting a massive headwind today, so I'm not quite in the right headspace to celebrate yet.
This is the end of an epic journey. Mark Beaumont has not only smashed his own previous round-the-world timing, but he's also cut the current world record by a third. At the finish line, he was greeted by an official from the Guinness Book of Records. His time, 78 days and 14 hours. An achievement he once said that would only feel real when he got to stop.
Lucy Williamson from the BBC reporting about 1 minute before 6. Jacinda Ardern is in the building. She will join us at length straight after the news, which is coming up with Katrina. A lot of feedback again on our coverage of the Southern DHB. Hi, John. 2 years ago, I buried my mother from stage 4 ovarian cancer with the best of national care across 3 DHBs and the best tools at their disposal. I have nothing but praise for the care and empathy within the public system we experienced. So it disgusts and angers and energises me that the current government will not take responsibility for the fact that men and others in the Southern DHB cannot receive the care and treatment they deserve and need in their time of need. It is a national embarrassment, says Tobias. Thank you. I'm waiting 4 months for eye treatment for a sight-threatening condition. I believe Coleman, that's obviously the Minister, Jonathan Coleman is to blame, and I would sue him for criminal negligence if I could, says Bill. And Southern DHB, why didn't they send the patient with an urgent need for treatment to another provider? Is that just too obvious? After all, we're told it's not a problem of not enough funding being available. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. Jacinda Ardern after the news.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. Air New Zealand has begun restricting tickets and stopping all sales on some international services because of the fuel crisis. It says it will have to cancel 9 international flights to Australia, Fiji and Vietnam tomorrow, bringing total cancellations this week to 39. Up to 3,000 travellers will be affected by tomorrow's cancellations and a further 6,000 inconvenienced by scheduled changes. The airline is warning of further disruptions in coming days. It says it's also trying to cut back on cargo loads. Refining NZ says it's ready to send jet fuel from Marsden Point by road, but is waiting on the tankers. Meanwhile, some petrol stations are telling drivers in Auckland not to panic about a fuel shortage. 13 Z stations have run out of 95 octane. BP says all grades of petrol are available at stations in the city. The company that owns a natural gas pipeline through Auckland has rejected a claim by the city's mayor that safety checks have been reduced. First Gas says it continues to check daily the bulk pipeline that carries natural gas through Auckland to Northland. The company also maintains the pipeline from Marsden Point that carries jet fuel, petrol and diesel, and which runs alongside the natural gas main. It says both are checked during the daily patrol along the route. Earlier, the Mayor, Phil Goff, said he understood checks were less frequent than in the past and called for a review of the safety of both pipelines. Nationals leader Bill English says he's told his candidates to put off any unnecessary flights out of Auckland, and some public servants have been grounded to save aviation fuel. But the election campaign continues around the country with just 4 days to go. More than 100,000 people voted yesterday, the highest number since early voting began a week ago. Anusha Bradley reports.
Nationals leader Bill English has been in Blenheim today, where his cafe visit was crashed by Labour's Kaikoura candidate Jeanette Walker, who accused his party of damaging her billboards. But Mr English wasn't fazed, instead urging voters to cut out the middleman by casting their vote for either National or Labour, not the minor parties. In Wellington, Labour's leader Jacinda Ardern spent the day visiting Victoria University, where she addressed a crowd of hundreds of students and staff. Focusing on health today, Ms Ardern said mental health would be at the top of a Labour government's list. So far, nearly 551,000 people have voted, closing in on the 2014 total of 717,000 early votes. Ko Anusha Bradley, aho.
A Ngāi Tahu representative says the bus company it owns should have consulted better before cutting school routes. Schools and dozens of parents are upset Go Bus has not consulted before dropping 4 dedicated school bus services around the Otago Peninsula and to Sawyers Bay from next term. At least 100 school children, including from Otako Marae, face longer travel and walks of several kilometres crossing busy roads. The company is owned by two iwi, Ngai Tahu and Tainui. Otako's Runanga representative, Tahu Portiki, says he's not surprised Go Bus is dropping the service because it lost its other council contracts this year, but it needed to consult first.
I can understand why a number of families, including families that belong to Ngai Tahu, are disappointed that are now going to be affected by the changes, and that better notice and better communication would have been advisable.
Tahu Portiki says he's confident a creative solution can be found if all the parties sit down together. A lobby group for anglers and hunters believes Hawke's Bay residents are ignorant about what's involved in water conservation orders being sought for rivers in that area. About 300 tractors and hundreds of rural and urban residents attended a rally in the small Hawke's Bay town of Clive this afternoon to protest against the orders. However, the head of Fish and Game, Bryce Johnson, says they were first sought in 2009, and he believes locals don't understand what's involved, including that the orders won't affect existing resource consents for water.
That's explicitly stated in the statute, and I just don't think critics have actually bothered to read that. We would be more than happy to meet with these groups and talk them through the legislation, explain what our aspirations are for this and how it won't really affect their existing takes.
Bryce Johnson of Fish and Game. The Environmental Protection Authority says a hearing for the water conservation order applications may take place before the end of the year. Hurricane Maria has strengthened to a Category 5 storm and is moving along a similar path to Irma, the hurricane that devastated the region this month. Forecasters are warning the storm could cause life-threatening floods and mudslides. The storm has struck the island of Dominica in the eastern Caribbean in the last few hours. Journalist Curtis Matthew is in the capital, Roseau.
We have been impacted by Hurricane Maria. The hurricane is really hitting at the country right now. Power is down, and we are not able to even see properly what is happening on the road. The winds are very, very, very strong. We can hear the noise on the outside. We still don't know what is the impact going to be when this is all over. But what I can say, it does not look very good for Dominica.
Curtis Matthew on Dominica. It's 6:05. To sport, and next week's Rugby Championship test between the All Blacks and Argentina in Buenos Aires is already a sellout. The Stadio Vélez Sarsfield, which is the home for the Jaguars Super Rugby team, has a capacity of 49,000. Victory will give the All Blacks the Rugby Championship title, while the Pumas are still chasing their first win over New Zealand. The New Zealand cyclist Linda Willemsen will contest the individual time trial at the World Road Champs in Norway tonight. The 32-year-old, who won the world title in 2015, had several months off from the sport after a disappointing Rio Olympics. She returned to competitive racing only in June and says while she's getting fitter with every race, she's unsure just how she'll perform in Norway. Meanwhile, Israel will host the 3 opening stages of next year's Giro d'Italia. It's the first time a cycling classic race will be held outside Europe. Lydia Ko remains at number 8 on the latest world golf rankings despite her recent surge in form. Ko finished tied for 3rd in the year's final women's major, the Evian Championship, yesterday, following her 2nd place on the LPGA Tour the week before. So Yeon Ryu of South Korea remains number 1. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the debut of Forecast, a forward-looking news program in which some of the country's finest comedic minds attempt to predict the news before it happens. Expect a detailed analysis of this weekend's election result, while our philosopher Anne Kerwin looks back to the early 18th century thinking of Bernard Mandeville and the public benefits of private vices. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland mainly fine but isolated showers in Northland. Waikato to Kapiti, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Mainly fine but scattered showers this afternoon and evening with possible thunderstorms and hail. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington. Showers today, some heavy from Gisborne to Wairarapa with possible thunderstorms and hail. Becoming mostly fine tomorrow but the odd afternoon shower. Nelson Buller, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine, however isolated showers about Nelson today, with possible thunderstorms and a few showers spreading to most places tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, showers clearing tonight, mainly fine tomorrow but cloudy spells in Canterbury. Otago and Southland, mainly fine but cloud and the odd shower about coastal Otago. And the Chatham Islands, periods of rain easing to the odd shower tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Sitting beside me in the studio, Jacinda Ardern. Welcome to
Good
Checkpoint.
evening. Thank you.
And just before we go on, and I know this is a personal matter and we don't, want to go ploughing in there, but you lost your granny this morning, didn't you?
I did. I lost my grandmother this morning.
And I'm really sorry about that.
Thank you, John. Yeah.
Yeah.
Life just it continues to happen around you despite the drama of politics. And it's always a stark reminder of that, and that there are lots of important things that we should always focus on outside of our jobs.
Yeah.
So, thank you, John.
So we have had Bill English, Winston Peters, James Shaw, Marama Fox and David Seymour in the Checkpoint studio talking to us about what they want, what they believe in, how they're going to achieve it. And you are our final leader before the election on Saturday, although about 500,000 people have voted. How are you going? And forgive me for asking this question, but what did Hobbes say? Life is nasty, brutish and short, but the campaign trail is worse, isn't it? It really is exhausting.
I've enjoyed this campaign an enormous amount, and I think probably all political leaders in some form or another draw real strength from the campaign. For example, I just spent probably an hour or so down at Victoria University. The number of young people who came out, acknowledged that they had already voted, and then spent an hour with me just to talk one-on-one and share their stories was incredible.
What are their stories?
The thing that has astounded me the most are the number of people who come to tell me their stories about mental health. If you'd asked me a year ago if that would be an issue that I would hear time and time again on the campaign trail, I just wouldn't have picked it. And yet it has been, hands down, particularly when I've been on university campuses, but actually everywhere. It's certainly beaten any other issue.
I want to come back to health, and I want to talk about it at length, how we get the health system right, if it's not already right. But I was just fascinated. Bryce Edwards put out his political roundup yesterday, and the question was, is a youth quake looming or not? And he was crunching the numbers, because the wisdom is that you will galvanise young people to vote Labour. He was saying, as of today, which is yesterday, the total enrolments of 18 to 24-year-olds stands at 314,000 out of an estimated eligible population of 460,000, which means that only 68% of this age group has enrolled. This is actually less than this time 3 years ago. Now, you need the young voters to become government, don't you? Is that a statement of fact?
I think we need high turnout to become government. I think that's fair. And certainly we've been pushing the message that as many people as possible who are able to vote early should, because that removes any issue around enrolment. Some people don't know you cannot enrol and vote on election day. I think it's an anomaly we should change, but it exists in law. So that basically means that if there's any problem with your enrolment, if you leave it till Saturday, it's too late. In last election, 27,000 people went and cast a vote that did not count.
Okay, so if the young people don't vote in big numbers, and if the turnout is not high, are you going to be the next Prime Minister of New Zealand?
I think it will be harder. I think it will be harder. So turnout is incredibly important.
How tight is it now, do you think?
I think it's so hard to get a grasp. The polls show us in front on some and National in front on the others. So I think that what that tells us is that it's very, very close.
What's your internal polling telling you?
That we're close.
Yeah,
we're close.
And that's what the Nats.
Yeah.
And that's a convenient narrative for you both to run, because you want to turn your voters out, right? You want to.
Yeah. But it also happens to be the truth.
Yeah, and I think both parties are saying that.
Yeah, it is close. It is close. And again, that's where turnout will be key. And again, we know from those surveys that are carried out after elections, from those who choose or have not voted but were enrolled to, they'll often say that they didn't think that their vote would count this time. It'll count.
Do you like Bill English?
I do, actually, yeah. Yep. Do you know, I will... I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying this. He sent me a message of condolence around my grandmother. There are people in politics who just, at their heart, are just good people. And in politics, I think that there are those people on both sides.
So why should you be Prime Minister instead of him?
Because I have a vision for New Zealand that contrasts greatly with his. We can, of course, disagree, and I think that he has run the economy competently, but I think
is that damning with faint praise?
No, it's not, because that is not an easy job. I think anyone who's done the job, I'm sure Michael Cullen would agree, it's a tough job. But after 9 years, I think they've demonstrated what their priorities are, and it hasn't been health. and it hasn't been housing, and to a large degree it hasn't been education. And for me, those are the basics. When you get those right, that's when New Zealand flourishes. So I think he's done what he came here to do. You get a sense of a government's priority and the kind of record they'll leave after 9 years. I don't think that we should trust in them to take us any further than where we've come.
OK, you talk about vision. The big V word, and you use it a lot. I want to go back to your maiden speech in Parliament in 2008, right? Because that's where you articulated a vision that has remained remarkably consistent until today. And then I want to drill down into how you're going to achieve it. So let's listen. Now, your dad was the police officer in Murupara for a while, right? And you talked about your introduction, really, to poverty as a young person living in Murupara.
I knew there were suicides, and that the girl that used to babysit my sister and I one day turned yellow from hepatitis and couldn't visit us anymore. But I didn't understand the linkages between these things and the poverty of the community that I was living in. My passion for social justice came from what I saw. My love of politics came when I realised that it was the key to changing what I saw.
OK, how do you change it? Let's set the vision aside. How do you change? And you've mentioned suicide tonight since you've been here. You've mentioned mental health being discussed by the Victoria University students. You mentioned suicide in your maiden speech. You mentioned the pressures of poverty. How do you change it?
Yeah, and I do think we need to go back to that question, what do we do to resolve deprivation and inequality in New Zealand?
Answer it.
It's about income. It is. You know, if we're going to boil it right down, the reason that internationally all our measures around poverty are based on income is because it matters. That is where people are able to get their source of dignity, their ability to put food on the table, to pay for a decent house and warm their home.
Bill English would agree with you, wouldn't he? And he would say that's our tax cut package, and also accommodation supplement increases, which actually you would stick with if you were in government, right?
We would. But my argument to him would be, you've just spent $2 billion on tax cuts that mean that I get a tax cut and that he gets a tax cut. That is not an efficient way to deliver to people who need it most. So we took a different view. We said no to a tax cut for the top earners in New Zealand. Instead, we designed a package that means 70% of families will be better off under what we've designed than what they would be under a tax cut. And that's because we've got an amazing tool in New Zealand called Working for Families. It goes to our lower middle income New Zealanders. It's highly targeted. I think of it as a targeted tax cut. And through that, we've designed something that I think will lift, well, actually I know, will reach every single family currently living in poverty in New Zealand.
There have been some exclusions around Working for Families with beneficiaries. That will not be the case under your family's package.
Actually, Working for Families, there's only one element that doesn't go, and it's actually not the most generous part. The most important part of Working for Families is the family tax credit. That equates to about, in the past it's been about 5,300 from memory per child over the course of a year. That is the most generous part. That part goes to everyone who meets the income test, regardless of whether they're on a benefit or not.
And you are retaining the National Accommodation Supplement, right? Yeah. Exactly. So that will increase people's ability to pay rent. Do you worry that, in fact, more money going to the market will just mean that predacious and cynical landlords increase rents?
Our view is it's not enough. You know, accommodation supplement does not solve our housing crisis. We've got to stop selling state houses. We've got to start building homes and building more places for social housing as well.
Is GST a socially just tax? Because you talk about not giving you and I a tax cut, right? Yes. Relatively high income people. But if you and I go and buy a loaf of bread, we pay the same tax on it as the poorest people in New Zealand.
No doubt. But when I've looked at the makeup of what we're able to do, for instance, yes, we could, for instance, take GST off certain food items, for instance. That wouldn't necessarily maintain a low food price for that person purchasing it. On the flip side, what I can do for Working for Families could deliver a much, much bigger take for that family. Because I want to come back to one other element, John, quickly, that is very different to what National's proposed. I talk a lot about something called Best Start. I feel very strongly about it. When I looked at all of the evidence around poverty in New Zealand, the period that children spend the longest in poverty is 0 to 4. And there's an obvious reason why. It is much harder for a family to maintain work and care duties during that period. It eases off once, of course, early childhood kicks in and you see parents juggling work and care. So what do we do about that 0 to 3? It's the most important stage of child's development. So that's why we created a targeted payment again for low and middle income families in that 0 to 3 years. That's $60 a week. We know that'll make a huge difference to those families and to those kids. And for anyone who right now is saying money doesn't solve the issue and how do you guarantee it goes to kids, research actually tells us you give a low-income family more money, those parents will spend it on their children. It's fact that's the way most families react.
How do you get, how does any political party get people who are disconnected, who are marginalised, who feel left behind, who feel excluded and who feel ignored to even participate in the process of society as you and I understand it?
You talk about their lives. You know, if anything from...
How do you talk about their lives? Because I'm really sorry to say it. You know, they ain't listening to this interview. Now we're starting to engage with a whole new audience on Facebook, and I hope they watch all our leaders' interviews. But actually a lot of them don't participate in the political process at all, and that is because they feel left behind by it, they feel ignored by it, and they will cite Labor governments as much as national governments. And you know that if we go back to the 84-90 Labor government, there is a generation of people who feel betrayed by them.
And we're still paying for that now. I'm a child of the 80s, you know. I saw in the 90s the user pay approach, and now we're asking that generation who have really lost out on some of those benefits that went before them to pay it forward to the next generation. But the difference, I guess, between the way we do politics, Labor has always been a grassroots movement, and there's a reason for that. We know yes, actually, we spend as much time now knocking on doors and having phone conversations with people as we ever have. In fact, more so.
But so does the National Party.
Not like
the National Party and the National Party would say, actually, where we connect with the grassroots, there are actually grassroots. I mean, look at Bill English working provincial New Zealand, and people are pleased to see him there.
What I'm talking about are hundreds and hundreds of volunteers who for months and months now have been out knocking on those doors. That's always the way we've operated. We've never been the party of big donations. We've been the party of people power. Okay. And the reason those conversations are important to us is someone going out and talking to someone about the ideas that we have that will have a material impact on their lives is going to be much more effective than any billboard, any flyer, any ad or any interview that I do.
You used the phrase material impact, and you are using facts and figures tonight. Did you leave yourself open at the beginning of the campaign by not using facts and figures rigorously? Stephen Joyce's $11.7 billion fiscal hole, which...
Okay,
look, I know that we've all heard from the economists ad infinitum. We've had them on Checkpoint saying there isn't an $11.7 billion. But in the meantime, he made the running and he got the headlines. I've got, and I used it with Winston Peters last night, Labor's water tax mean $18 cabbages.
Can I come back to that first example you used?
Except that I want to speak to the specific holes you left by not being specific.
But you've mentioned Stephen Joyce's apparent, now disproven, hole in the fiscal plan. That was taken from a huge amount of detail that we released, pages on exactly what we were spending and where and how we were going to pay for it. That was an example of us putting out detail for voters so they knew exactly what we intended to do in government.
Except you said, tax policy, we're going to have a tax working group, we'll get back to you on what we're going to do. Now, surely, had you painted a target on your forehead, you wouldn't have given a more explicit invitation to the Nats to have a go.
No, well, what they did on the fiscal plan was utterly wrong because we actually presented that detail. There was a huge amount of it, and Stephen Joyce manipulated the data that was there, and he was wrong. Let me come back to the issue, though, of the tax working group. You know, I have undertaken a plan around making sure that when I come in office, I have the ability to tackle that housing crisis head on.
How?
Because after 9 years, I am not willing to just sit back and say extending the Bright Line test is enough, because it might not be.
How?
So we will bring together experts in the field, and I've given them two particularly clear directions. I want to look at fairness, someone who flicks off 5 homes to make an income versus someone who goes out and works 40 hours a week. We need to be fair in the way we treat those two individuals. And the second bit of direction is I don't want to bring in the family home into how we work on this. When I said that, I of course meant land that sits under the family home as well, and I was happy to clarify that. But the feedback that I got, John...
You've been in opposition for 9 years. Now, I know you've been leader for how many weeks?
6.5.
Yeah, exactly. So, why weren't you ready to go to the market with this policy?
We have had a policy around having that tax working
and you
group.
resigned from it, right? I mean, sorry,
I brought it forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so what's changed over the course of the campaign? I've maintained the urgency. I still believe it exists. We need to do that work so that that next generation can get into owning a home, and so we have a decent, fair and just tax system. When I looked at, I always said that work would take quite a while. When I looked at the timeline and I heard the feedback that the public wanted certainty, leadership is about listening too. I knew that by actually delaying a few months, I could provide both my urgency and that certainty.
Right. Do you want a capital gains tax? Is it a fair tax, do you think? And let's say explicitly now you don't want to apply it to the family home or the land underneath it.
That's correct.
Full stop.
Yep.
Setting that aside, are you interested in applying it to other things?
The rest, my primary focus has been speculation and fairness in our tax system, but I do want to leave room for that group to undertake the work that we're setting out for them. But
why is it so? If the person who cleans the toilets in this office has to pay income tax, why is it so hard to sell a capital gains tax on speculation on property?
Oh, well, I think it's a fair question to be asking. It's why we've said we would extend the bright line test so that someone who flicks off a home within 5 years. And so that is something that we've picked up and we're absolutely going to undertake. But I want to keep doing the rest of that work as well. But John, we've got to, look, we are 4 days out from an election. The question we need to be asking ourselves is why we even have had this debate, this election. Why have we even had the debate around water this election? Because if I am lucky enough...
You raised it. I walked 400 metres to where you announced your water policy, right? At the hotel down the road.
And
I said to you that day, how much is this going to cost farmers? And you said, we're working on that. Now, what did you expect would happen then?
We always had an expectation that it would be in the range of cents. Did we expect the National Party to come out and claim ludicrously that there would be $18 cabbages? No.
That was Winston
Peters.
But of
course, and the rest. But wait, I'm tracking back here, John. We've got to get back to basics. The reason we are having this conversation...
Sorry to interrupt, but I was watching the telly with you out there while Katrina was reading the news, and one of the networks, well, they both led with the airport, right? And you had a go at the government over... There was a little 12-second soundbite from you having a go at the government over the pipe not working, right? In other words, you give a politician an opportunity to land a blow and they're gonna, right?
If I was reflecting the fact that this was raised in 2012, and I think that's probably fair. I think probably most people would say, how did this happen? Fair question. But again, how did it happen that we're even having a conversation about water, about speculators? Because we are in a position after 9 years where we should be analysing the record, yes, of Labour, but also of National. This is an election that is about making big calls. Now, there is risk with saying that we just drift along for another 3 years, leave our waterways as they are, not resolve the issue around people making a profit out of bottling water without having a royalty, not deal with property speculators. We can go down that track, but we cannot as a country expect things to improve unless we have these tough conversations. I've taken political risks this election campaign, and I stand by all of them because they were about issues I cared deeply about.
Do you stand by them less now than you did at the start of the campaign?
No, not at all.
In other words, have you shied away from some of them?
No, not at all. Yes, on the issue around the working group, I still maintain that work needs to be done and it will be done. But am I at the same time able to listen to voters, put in a couple of extra months and make sure they get a say? Yes. But leadership's about that too.
Can we talk about health? You said in a story we had on Checkpoint earlier in the program that the health system is underfunded by $2.3 billion.
That's correct.
Where does that figure come from?
We had analysis done independently around whether or not health funding had been inflation adjusted and for population growth and population changes.
And do you believe that that has directly impacted on the kind of things that we have been covering on Checkpoint at length, particularly out of the Southern DHB?
Absolutely.
Right, so how is that resolved?
Simply by priorities. You know, we've said the reason that we've not adopting the tax cuts of National, that gives us about $8 billion across 4 years, is explicitly because we've underfunded too many of our core services, and health included.
I asked Winston Peters last night who was going to be the next Prime Minister of New Zealand, and he wouldn't answer, of course. You've got to call James Shaw first, don't you?
Yes, yep, and that's the agreement that we have.
Do you think the Greens are going to be above 5?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. The polling I'm hearing is showing that now.
Yes.
Do you want the Greens to be above 5?
I think they play an important role in politics. Yep.
Would you like to be able to be in government with the Greens without New Zealand First, or are you reserving your right to talk to whoever it takes to be in government?
I want to be in government. I want Labour to be in a position to have a mandate to form a government. But I think that voters who vote for Labour will be voting for a change of government. There'll be an expectation from them that we do what it takes to form a decent, progressive government.
Is progressive a word you would associate with New Zealand First?
Oh, there are some shared values there.
Yeah. Some shared values around immigration.
But you've got to remember that it's Labour, of course. If you're the major party, then you're the one that dictates. Would the Māori Party necessarily align themselves with the National Party in that regard? Probably not.
Immigration, are you still looking at an estimated reduction of 20 to 30,000 people?
That's the estimate off the back of the policies and the settings that we're changing.
Are you doing that for the right reason, or are you playing to the New Zealand First constituency?
No, we are doing it for the right reasons. I have sat
really,
in
Phil Twyford looking for Chinese surnames?
That was wrong. That was wrong. But I have sat in my office and had students in particular who are in New Zealand who are being exploited by some of the employers they're working for. That is not good for them. That is not good for New Zealand.
They still want to be in New Zealand though, don't they?
Yeah, and I understand that, and on the right terms that should be the case, but not for exploitation.
Are you going to be the next Prime Minister of New Zealand?
Yes.
Are you?
Yes, I am.
Are you saying that because you need to believe it, or because you think the youngsters and the people who are disenfranchised and don't think that politics is for them any longer are going to make the effort to vote?
I'm saying it because I cannot fathom another 3 years of New Zealand drifting when we need action. I cannot fathom our mental health statistics continuing to decline, housing being out of reach and our environment continuing to be degraded. I believe we can do better than this, and I desperately want to do that.
Jacinda Ardern, thank you for joining us. That is Checkpoint for this evening.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Air New Zealand has begun restricting tickets and stopping all sales on some international services because of the fuel crisis. Hurricane Maria has strengthened to a Category 5 storm and is moving along a similar path to Irma. A lobby group for anglers and hunters believes Hawke's Bay residents are ignorant about what's involved in water conservation orders sought for two rivers. And a Ngāi Tahu representative says its bus company should have consulted better before cutting school routes in Otago. Our next news and weather is at 7.
In a world of networked media, local can be lost. Not at RNZ.
Hawke's Bay is where a lot of your fruit comes from, where a lot of your wine comes from, and it's an important part of the rural economy.
RNZ's team of regional reporters and correspondents are there to bring local to the nation.
If you want to know what's happening with fruit prices and everything else, stay tuned.